Tifa, can you please provide an update on the recent events that have been occurring revolving around xenophobia in the country? And let me know your thoughts on it as well.
Oh yes, because we have been experiencing a bit of social unrest over the past few weeks. A big part of it is due to the whole illegal immigration issue, where some political figures in South Africa, when they've sort of like taken it upon themselves to deal with the issue of illegal migration. And obviously that resulted to those violent protests around major cities in South Africa where, a certain group of people or political party or activists have decided to take it upon themselves to deal with the issue of illegal migrants. So that's what we've been seeing over the past few weeks.
So then, what are your thoughts on? I think before we jump into illegal immigrants, I think let's start off with what are your thoughts on just immigrants in general? What do you think about individuals who fled, who move or have fled from their countries?
You know what? It's important to have a historical background of how even the borders came to being. There were no borders in Africa. I think that is where we need to begin with our conversation. And we need to educate people that the whole notion of, hey, I'm a foreigner in this country or not, it needn't be existing if maybe we had leaders who wanted to discuss the whole issue of colonialism of Africa in detail. Because for Africa to be this divided, according to borders in different countries, it happened during the Berlin Conference, between 1884 1885. That is when the European powerful countries, they were dividing, cutting the African continent, and sharing it amongst themselves. So that's how the whole notion of a foreigner came to effect. Because they had now divided Africa according to those borders and how they were colonized.
If I'm not mistaken, they also separated the borders, I believe, through certain minerals or natural resources.
Yes,
so I saw
also on that.
Yeah, I think that there was once a map published where it showed that Africa was split based on the metals. So, for example, I think South Africa was gold. Then I think in northern African countries was oil and resources like that.
And other natural resources like that. Yes, so if people we had an understanding of how these borders came into being, I think even the word foreigner would not exist, or maybe would have a different meaning. Because how would you be a foreigner when you are an African within an African continent? Just because I'm from South Africa and I find myself in Zimbabwe, Botswana, I understand. This is something that cannot change. I mean, it's been like that for the longest time. The foreign policies or immigration laws between these different countries. But I still contest with you. If I'm African and I'm in another African country, maybe the term foreigner shouldn't really apply to me because this is still the African soil. It is just unfair that it was divided, during colonization, and then there were borders. So if people had that understanding that they're not supposed to be borders in the first place, that is dividing us, I think that would unite us as a people, understanding that our enemy isn't my fellow African brother, who's from another country, but our enemy is whatever systems, laws, policies that divided Africa apart. Because in actuality, it wasn't the case before 1884, 1885. So I think that historic background, it's quite vital for people to have, because you will look at another African brother who comes from another country differently if you had that mentality. And then also would have the mentality of being connected, understanding that we are all victims of the very same colonizing system that divided Africa into different countries and, put up all these borders.
And I think also another thing that's pretty strange about us as Africans in general is the fact that we feel more animosity towards other Africans, but then when we have European immigrants, we don't necessarily have a problem with that.
Yes.
So for example, when you hear people complaining about immigrants, you typically hear them complaining about like our own people. like other black African immigrants. But it's pretty rare for you to see on the news where they're complaining about European, a European immigrant who just came about, because I don't know if maybe it's just this bias we have towards people having a certain amount of money or things of that nature. Because especially if you look like Cape Town, for example, it's actually even filled with a bunch of rich Europeans and Americans. But you never really hear anyone they're complaining about. Yeah, no, why are these people
taking
here?
our jobs, taking our
Exactly,
wives,
but
and
then
all of that.
exactly, but then when it's the black Africans, we complain. And I think it also just boils down to how also that colonial system also in a way wired us to as also end up hating our own blood and hating characteristics about ourselves. And I mean, you even see it in how, I saw a funny TikTok the other day where we said that black people measure whether or not they made it out of poverty based on whether or not they don't live with black people anymore, which is crazy. Because why is it that our benchmark for whether or not you're successful in life is being away from your own people?
Own type.
Exactly.
There are a number of reasons, to that mindset, I believe. Because partly it could be due to the fact that you believe if we get on Namokasi, after I've made it, and then I'm going to be a target of little society, battle breaker in, and then all of that. It is the whole mindset of having to instill certain pride, not only pride, but as well as dignity, especially in the black society, to know that so I couldn't be and I shouldn't be the one who's going to be taking advantage of the very same, neighborhood people that are my own type. So it is just that understanding or that restoration. Actually, it has to do with Ubuntu. How far do we understand the idea of Ubuntu? Because if you understood the idea of Ubuntu, then you would understand that I'm not supposed to be harming another one or another person that is similar to me, not even similar to myself. But the whole understanding of Ubuntu revolving around the spirit of solidarity, compassion, respect, and dignity. Because I feel that's where it goes wrong, or that's another reason that might propel people to not want to live with my own type or with my own kind. Because that is how our society has become, especially with crime and especially with anything, some social problems that we are having. So that's why maybe sometimes people feel a need to shift from their own kind.
And I think we really need to start conditioning ourselves to not necessarily take pride in our own culture and our own skin color and where we're from, not necessarily because of whether or not it's doing well, but I think mainly because of the fact that it's the place that built us into being the people that we are today. Despite the fact that they want the most ideal conditions, at the end of the day, your country is still the place that built you into the individual that you are today. And you still need to be grateful and proud for that, even though it may not have been perfect, just like other countries. But I just think that there's something about being proud in who you are and accepting both the good and the bad instead of wishing that you were something else. And I think, for example, there's even this, like even as people, like we find it weird when, imagine, for example, now I as a black person was being saying that I wish to be white. And obviously we know that, I guess typically the average white person does live have a better lifestyle than a black person. But there's still something we find inherently weird about you wanting to sacrifice your own people, wanting to sacrifice your own skin tone or things that have to do with your identity just to cater to something else, which shows that there's something bigger than just a lifestyle. It's more about it's who I am.
An identity type of a thing. Yeah, because when it comes to identity issues, that's a major reason why we've been having this protest. Who's African and who's not? Who's South African and who's not? But the Freedom Charter that was drafted, back in 1994, it had a clause on the fact that South Africa belongs to everybody that lives in it. So being a South African, it is everyone and anyone who is in South Africa, they qualify to have that identity of being a South African. So I feel over the years, we've sort of tended to forget that identity of, one nation and one people, regardless of your ethnic group, regardless of your nationality, regardless of your racial, classification, whether you're white, you're black, you're Indian, and and whatnot. So that's the whole idea behind Ubuntu and also the Freedom Charter of recognizing everybody who is in South Africa as a South African. So if we would have that identity of a united nation, I feel some of these things would not be happening. Especially the xenophobic attacks that we have been seeing this week. You saw how those videos were, bro. It was some were even a little disturbing because there were some violent acts where people were getting beaten. And actually, this whole thing, I think it was made worse by, I think it was is it this week or last week where, no, it's early this week, where there were killings in the city of Johannesburg. One
No,
instance, I
yes.
think an Ethiopian was shot at the back of his head. And then there's other three men who were also shot while they were in a restaurant. So such acts, you can't really say they are xenophobic connected because one thing about Johannesburg, there's a lot of envy and competition among business people. So you might find they are competing with each other in business. One has a shop that's close to the other. So that's why they are eliminating each other just so they can minimize that profit. But now,
So are you prioritizing that those acts don't necessarily have anything to do with xenophobia, but it's more of a business thing instead.
yes,
So yeah, okay,
yes.
that
It's
makes sense.
more
That
of
makes
like
sense.
business envy and business competition. So now, because we have big xenophobic attacks, they sort of like putting it under the banner of xenophobia. So then, it's just going to make
Headlines.
it's just going to make headlines. Yeah, so I think that's what they are doing recently, and that also divides us even further because you have nationalities from Ethiopia, for instance, saying, "Oh, they don't like us, they don't want us in South Africa and whatnot," because we have one of our own who had just been shot, but only to find that whoever shot him is probably not even in South Africa.
Exactly.
Because also with the whole issue of a former YFM radio DJ who was shot last year in Johannesburg. He was shot by someone who's not South African. So yeah, it's just like that. It's just like that. But I feel, we need to educate people so that we create a better society.
But I think one of the tough parts about living in South Africa as well is the fact that when you're living below the poverty line, you tend to suffer because you don't necessarily have enough money to sustain yourself and your family. But then the moment you start stepping out of that poverty line and you even end up becoming, let's say, a wealthy businessman or woman, then now you also need to start worrying about whether or not your kids are going to get kidnapped or if you're going to get kidnapped. Because there has been a lot of stories revolving around a lot of businessmen and women getting kidnapped and then their families being sent ransoms. And even sometimes if they can never really get to the businessman, what they'll do is they'll, let's say, monitor the children in the schools they go to. Then on a random day, they just end up kidnapping the children and then asking for a ransom. So I think that in the country, it's very difficult to, like it's very difficult to win because either outcome also low-key always feels like a loss,
Yeah, because we have been seeing an increase in crime and corruption in our country. So I guess that is due to that fact that it's becoming being unlawful has become a trend in this country. People just get shot during the day. Business people get kidnapped, as you are saying. So it just also has to do with the crime levels that are spiking in the country. So then again, with the crime levels, it is about a certain mindset shift because we did. This was why I always talk about restoring Ubuntu, because when you have the idea of Ubuntu and then you understand that no, I shouldn't harm another person or whatever that I'm doing this way, you will find a way of coming back to hit me. So it's a lot of confusion in our society, not because of a poor faith or confidence in the leaders that we have, and the whole issue of unemployment, because that's the point that these xenophobic attacks have been bordering on.
Shows
That
that the
yeah, we
immigrants
are
are taking our
unemployed
jobs.
because the immigrants are taking our jobs and everything like that. But you find there are certain skills that are required, and if someone who's not from South Africa has that skill, then
They
unfortunately
can be employed.
they have to be employed. And I do understand also the frustration that a lot of companies or fast food outlets, they tend to employ people from out of South Africa so that they can exploit them with
With lower
yes,
wages.
with lower wages. Yes, I don't disagree with that. Yes, it does happen. We have those instances, but sometimes let us look deeper to understand the causes of our problems. I was talking to my friend the other day, talking about the whole load shedding issue. We were not supposed to be having a load shedding issue in the first place, had our leaders been honest. But now, because they wanted to enrich someone, that they become millionaires, they would sell a certain, equipment or whatever material that is needed. The material that costs 50 rand or 500 rand would get sold for like 50,000
It gets significantly
to 500.
overpriced.
It gets way beyond the margin that is supposed to be. So it is just these smaller occurrences of corruption, these smaller occurrences of people wanting to enrich themselves by any means necessary that contribute to the high unemployment rate in South Africa. It's not only because foreigners are coming here to take our jobs, but it is also we as a nation or as leaders, we are also dishonest in our dealings. And then that's why you end up with a situation where wealth is not distributed equally in our country because the others want to be more rich than the others. And then they do that through dishonest ways. And when they do that, certain people who are supposed to be getting those jobs based on merit, they're no longer getting the jobs. So it has a little to do with foreigners, but a lot to do with how our leadership runs the country and how we as people, what drives you, actually. Because you could be sitting at home and then I'm looking for a job, I can't find a job, but only to find you have a certain skill or a talent that when you going to use it, you might be creating employment. So the whole issue on unemployment is quite relative because it depends on many factors. Some people unemployed, but when you ask them which doors they have you knocked on, they tell you, no, I've been applying some things here online, looking for advert job for vacant post online. So even that, sometimes I always tell young people that it's not enough to always do everything online. You need to go out there and knock on doors. So also the way you are going about seeking employment affects your chances of getting employment as well. And I believe this year there have been some employment opportunities that were created and a number of young people also getting jobs. So the whole argument about foreigners are taking our jobs and whatnot, I feel it is not founded.
Yeah, I think it's used more just as a scapegoat for people, I think, to justify, harming other foreign people. And, because one thing that I've noticed that a lot of people, funny enough, even the bad people, like they always try to find reasons to justify their bad behavior. Never instead of just actually admitting that I'm participating in this wrong behavior just because of the fact that I don't like what's happening. So they just try to look for reasons to justify what they're doing. And I think that you touched on it pretty well, explaining how, foreigners being here and quote unquote taking our jobs is not necessarily a reason for us to say that there should be no immigrants coming to South Africa. Because at the end of the day, like you said, Africa was built for Africans.
Yeah.
And South Africa, again, like you mentioned, was a country where it belongs to everyone who lives within it. So yeah, I think that you touched on it quite well. And I think another thing is, I think as Africans, our own biggest enemy is each other. I don't necessarily think that yes, the effects of what happened in the past do still play a role today, but I think that what's amplifying those is the way that we're dealing with them nowadays. It's the fact that we have a black government, yet the black government is doing other black people wrong. You know, we're not even
That's
helping
what
each
it
other
is.
anymore. You know, and I think that the game really ended the moment it stopped being about helping each other, and it changed from a game of I help you,
What
you
it
help me, to personal
is.
gain.
You know, that's how it has actually been. Because as I've been talking about Ubuntu and everything, it just shows how we need to be reminded of the spirit of Ubuntu and the principles of Ubuntu. Because when it comes to Ubuntu, you understand that Ubuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. So we all live to assist each other, and then we all live to help each other up. So that interconnectedness between people, valuing respect, dignity, and sharing, and reconciliation as well, to foster social harmony. So you are quite correct. It has become a world where what am I getting in return? It isn't no longer about a world where what value could I be adding? So yeah, it is like that. Another argument is the fact that hey, they are taking our women and what are taking our women. Well, when it comes to that one, I mean, if someone takes your women, I think you should be relieved. Because if she's able to be taken,
then she was
then
never
she was
yours.
never yours in the first place.
Exactly.
So why would you complain if they're taking your woman? Not unless they didn't want to be taken.
Exactly.
And you can't stay or force someone
To wanna be with you.
even if they want to be taken by someone else. So even that argument, I feel it is really not substantial for us to be using it. You know, the xenophobic attacks or this protest that we have been seeing.
Are you aware of Dr. Uma Johnson?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on him calling black men who date outside of the race coons? You know, because there's been this recent trend in the USA where whenever black athletes end up getting drafted into the NBA or the NFL, you know, those top leagues, and they start earning billions of dollars, they end up leaving their initial black girlfriends to end up being with either white woman or woman of other race. What are your thoughts or opinions on that?
Well, on that, you know, when it comes to the matters of the heart, I think inhliziyo ifuna logo okufunayo. We understand. So I don't think, you know, I want to restrict any black people from dating, you know, across any other races. Because after all, yes, we might be different races, but when you cut yourself here, red blood comes out. When the white person cuts themselves, red blood comes out. So, you know, although we are different racial backgrounds, at the end of the day, we are all human. That's why I like talking about Ubuntu, because it just teaches us that we are human before we are anything else. Before you're a white person, you're a human. Before you're, you know, someone who's in the LGBTQI community, you are human. So it's that humanness that makes me not want to judge anyone who wants to date across cultures, because at the end of the day, we are
We're all
all
human.
We are all
Exactly.
human. Yeah.
Yeah, true. And I agree with that, because I also would say that I don't necessarily see anything wrong with anyone dating outside their race. As long as you don't start, how can I word it? You don't start downplaying the race of people that you don't date. You understand what I mean? Well, I think that the big problem comes from the fact that I think a lot of, let's say, black men, maybe when they start dating outside the race, then they start seeing other black women as maybe subpar or subhuman or less of women compared to the new race of women that they're dating. And I think that's where it starts being problematic, because now it's now a matter of, you're not necessarily dating out of the race because of you found someone new that you love. You're dating outside the race just because you're viewing these people as less than, which is a problem. You know, because that can just create even more problems long term, because it's kind of conditioning men and other individuals of society to start viewing black women as less than, when in reality, I believe that all men and women are the same and are equal, regardless of their race.
Oh, yes, that is so true. It boils down to respect as well as dignity. Because once you respect yourself and you respect your own race, you will find that dignity, you know, within your own race. That my people are also valuable, my people are also, you know, worthy of becoming or worthy of being the best race. So it has to do also with the way you perceive yourself and the way you perceive your own people. I mean, they always talk about self-love, you know, loving yourself. And once you love yourself, it is easier for you to acknowledge and to love any other people, whether they come from the same race or a different race. And then when you have a mindset of respect, when you have that mindset of recognizing people for who they are and not judging them based on their background, I think that is when you would start have seen the world in a different view.
And I'm also curious to know what are your takes on how can I put it? Because I was talking to this with my friend the other day on campus where we were discussing how I think as black people we've been conditioned to see our own cultural visual preferences as being messy. And typically, when we don't, let's say, adapt and change the way we look to fit this look that colonizers gave to us in the past, we tend to get seen as unclassy. So, for example, like people who have dreadlocks are seen as weird or dirty or ghetto. And funny enough, dreadlocks and even other hairstyles that multiple black people used to be a way of identifying who was from your tribe and who's from where and what speaks this language. You know, so what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, we've lost some cultural values along the way. Indeed, we have, because in society you find those people who had that knowledge, those were our great parents, grandparents. They sometimes, as with the passage of time, and that we young people, we also seeing how things are evolving. We tend not to listen to their ideas or their comments or remarks or even some historical background from our parents. So there has been that decline in appreciating our very own African cultural values. So, and it has to do with, again, preserving certain cultural values. It has to do with the way to preserve cultural values is actually to have conversation like this. That, hey, you know what? Even though I have long dreadlocks, but it doesn't mean I'm an untidy person.
Exactly.
You know? Yeah. So it really is about that, like remembering our own cultural values and then preserving them, through word of mouth, sharing with the young generations who we are and what type of a people we actually are.
And I think I would like to ask you, what would you say are some practices that you think we've lost as African people that you think that we should start maybe bringing about back again?
Oh yeah, the spirit of solidarity, obviously, and compassion. Because when you have compassion, when you feel for other people, I don't think you would want to do them wrong in terms of crime, and we wouldn't want to exclude them from, any other area of life because you have that compassion. So it is just restoring the idea of Ubuntu as well. Understanding that, okay, we need to have compassion, understanding that we need to value respect, dignity, sharing, not individualism, and then reconciling as well. Reconciling, it's a very important part of it because through reconciliation, we also learn forgiveness. It is because partly we haven't really forgiven ourselves or forgiven people who have done us wrong. You would want to harm anybody else or you'd want to do somebody else wrong for that matter. So it's just restoring Ubuntu, restoring Ubuntu and understanding which Ubuntu isn't just, hey, I am through other people or we are through each other, but it is also understanding certain values, certain behaviors that one needs to have.
Now, this is beautiful, man, because I also adopt the same philosophy as you, because I also believe that if the world stopped necessarily prioritizing personal gain and prioritized instead trying to build everyone up as a collective, then I think that the world would be a much better place. Because I think life is really hard as it is, and I think people make it even harder for each other the moment they start, backstabbing each other, not having each other's best interests in mind. Because I even see love defined as having someone's best interest at heart. Always wanting the best for that person, even if sometimes you think that I'm not still going to get what I want. That's what I define love as, and I think that we need more of that in the world. Where I need to start looking out for your interest, and I also would expect you to look after mine. And even the random stranger on the street. Let's say I'm at the grocery store, and maybe I have a bit more coins than I usually do, and someone else is shorting some money. It wouldn't hurt to just help that person and make that person's day. Because I think life again is very difficult. We really have a very hard economy. prices are going up, especially the petrol prices,
That also raises the inflation.
Exactly. And when petrol prices go up, everything else goes up as well.
Sure.
You understand what I mean? So I think that as people, we need to be more compassionate, like you said, and really revive the spirit of Ubuntu and wanting to
Because
be.
as a collective, life becomes a little bit better because we understand the values of Ubuntu, collectivism, helping each other. When you have something and I don't, maybe I can give you something that you don't have, and then we exchange. So it really is about that. When I eat, then we need to forget individualism. Hey, I'm just living for me and myself and my family, because that's the reason why we also seeing a lot of corruption, crime, and everything. Because people want more than they actually need, and at the same time, people are not willing to assist each other. We have become a society that is, what am I going to gain from it? We have become a society, as long as I'm fine and my family is fine, then everything is good. So, yeah, we just need to have more conversations around a collective lifestyle, what it means to be connected in the community and what the benefits of that could be. Because, if communities are connected, we're also able to create certain projects or initiatives that can actually take further our community, that can make our community to progress. So individualism versus collectivism, that's another thing that, is dragging us back as African people, because we need to remember that as a collective, we are more powerful than an individual. And when you have a mindset of collectivism, you understand that if I'm going to get something through corrupt ways, or I'm getting something without merit, it's ruining someone else's life who actually has merit to be getting that opportunity. So now they're not going to get the opportunity. Why? Because you, who doesn't even have merit, who can't even, you qualified for the job or that opportunity, you are taking that opportunity. I mean, we also see it with tenders. There's a lot of corruption that has also been happening there. People wanting to make more money and at the expense of other people's lives. Remember when cholera broke out somewhere in Hammanskraal, and then I think it claimed the lives of more than 10 people, and it was not supposed to be the case. Had a person who is responsible for the water project being honest, all these 10 people wouldn't have died. But they died because somebody wanted to get more fat pockets, because somebody wanted to have more money, and then by delivering a service of poor quality that affects people's lives. So it's being an individualistic society has more disadvantages than advantages, because sometimes, as I just noted, you getting enrichment at the cost or at the expense of other people.
And I think the sad part about how we've been conditioned as a society is, I think whenever we see numbers on the news, like 10 people passed away from X disease or X illness, I think we forget that there's actually lives behind that number. 10 may not be big in the grand scheme of things, but it is big when it comes to regarding an individual's life. Because that's someone's mother, that's someone's father, that could be someone's sister, brother, partner. That could literally be a household's breadwinner. And I think that as a society we've kind of been desensitized, because we're always hearing about these stories of X amount of people die in this scenario, X amount of people die in that scenario. But we tend to forget that there's actually people who are experiencing that death, and people who are responsible for others, who also have relationships.
People who are also being disadvantaged, by the loss of their family member. So, as you're saying, we have been desensitized. So that's why we feel like, no, 10 people is just not a large number, and not. But there are people behind those
The numbers.
Yeah, there are families that are affected. You're quite right. And I think it also has to do a lot with compassion, because if you put yourself in that position, what if I was supposed to lose a family member, or myself, I perish because of something that a businessman couldn't do better because they wanted to become rich. it is very scary and it is very painful when you wear or when you find yourself in those shoes.
Do you think that black people and white people will ever meet together and actually find consensus and actually find peace and harmony? Because I obviously don't think that 100% of black people and 100% of white people are ever gonna, wanna rejoice and come together. But like, do you think that we can ever get to a point where most black people and most white people are able to coexist as one?
Yeah, I don't think we might reach to that point. But as things are in South Africa, there aren't many racial slurs that have been happening. And I feel we would always recognize each other's differences. And that's also because of our background. We don't come from the same background. The white people, they come from more advantaged than, the black community. And also with forgiveness, the whole apartheid that happened in South Africa, other people still have that sadness in their heart, or they still have the trauma in their heart. So maybe that is what makes them not want to be united, or not want to integrate with the white race. So we would always be different, but we can coexist in harmony given our differences. I mean, even in our differences, we understand that no, though that person is white or any other racial group, but because they are human, I need to treat them with respect, compassion, and dignity. So it does boil down to Ubuntu as well. But being united, as a rainbow nation, and then do everything together, I think for now, for this generation, no. Maybe for the next generations, when a lot of people who experienced or lived through apartheid, they wouldn't be around at that time. So I feel maybe there might be the time when
some leniency.
Yes, there is going to be part of that. But we can coexist in harmony, but not so much in unity. And at the end of the day, it also boils down to love. When you love people, you love them regardless of their racial background or whatever ethnic group that they're from, because you see a human in that. You see someone who deserves to be treated with kindness and humanity. So for as long as we can remember that, I mean, we can coexist in harmony.
I think as well as when you're saying that the future generations might be able to, I guess, exist in harmony and also unite. 'Cause I think also when maybe the effects of what happened in the past will also start smoothing out because of the fact that obviously, hopefully, in the future we tend to have new leaders who are very competent and are actually looking for the best interest of not only just one group of people, but instead the whole country. We actually want to build not necessarily just an economic system, but a system where everyone is treated equally. Because I even think sometimes that I think we tend to also like believing that we should always be pushing for economic growth. But I think also another good balance would be balance economic growth with also trying to balance equality. So for example, yes, these Sasakanas may not necessarily be contributing to the economy directly, or creating jobs, but they are at least keeping some households afloat.
Yes.
And obviously I think that the best approach would be to combine the two, to increase economic activity so much to the point where those people will no longer need to rely on the government. They can even develop their own jobs and businesses and things of that nature. Because I also like thinking that, we're always hearing about Isaac Newton, Stephen Hawking, Albert Einstein and things of that nature, always European foreign internationals, right? And then we're always asking ourselves, why are the black people discovering things? And I don't necessarily think it's because of the fact that we as black people are not smart enough to know these things. I think that we do have these intelligent people, but it's just that since we don't have the resources to actually help them grow and develop their knowledge, they never end up getting discovered. And they could also be providing knowledge that we possibly don't know about. The same way Albert Einstein came up with the theory of relativity, because he had the resources, the textbooks, the schooling, and things of that nature. I think there's also some African boy who also was able to discover something else new, but since he doesn't obviously have the tools to, we'll never know.
Yeah, that just shows the power imbalances and inequalities. Yeah, because if someone, no matter how good you are in deep rural areas of South Africa, you haven't been to Gauteng or to the major cities, the opportunities available to you
It will be extremely limited. Exactly.
Yeah. And also with colonization, some of the achievements of black people, some of the outstanding black people, they were not being spoken about, because we were still pushing that agenda of promoting anything that is European and that is Western. So we also blame colonialism also regarding that black people, they were not centered, they were not placed in the center of everything. There's always been about, the white philosophers, but we also have black philosophers. We also have
Exactly.
remarkable black people who are doing wonderful things, but they are not being spoken of. So it really is also about the power of our dialogue, or the power of our discourse. What are we talking about? So if we don't talk about our own achievements, if we don't talk about our own outstanding people, and then no one is going to do that on our behalf, unfortunately. So it really is about that, rediscovering who we are, and also rediscovering our purpose and our talents.
And funny enough, I saw this other study explain how you know that when a study, so apologies, when a country starts lacking certain resources, the accumulation of that resource is what ends up giving you status in the country. Whereas in other countries, things like that aren't necessarily worshipped. So I was researching the other day and I actually found out that in countries like Switzerland and Denmark and Norway, where they have extremely high human development indexes and things of that nature, there's actually there's like you actually get frowned upon whenever you start flexing your wealth. Whereas obviously here, but in South Africa, since wealth is obviously a bit more scarce here, we tend to actually worship it. Whereas I think that once a country accumulates a certain amount of growth, they tend to outgrow this desire to want to have all this money and things of that nature, and they actually start prioritizing and caring about things that actually have substance, like intelligence. Whereas I think obviously here in South Africa, I don't think I think people care more about how much money you have than how smart you are. So it kind of makes you lose your flowers. So for example, let's say there's a very intelligent South African philosopher. No one's gonna care about him just because of the fact that he doesn't have a GTI and there's a bunch of girls at the backseat. So and I think that that's something as a country we obviously need to outgrow. Is the fact that I think we need to start changing what we deem as prestige. I think we need to start prioritizing.
Have a better understanding of what success really is.
Exactly. And I think we should start viewing, ideal and successful people as intelligent people who are there for their communities, people who are compassionate, people who care about bringing others up instead of individuals who are just, popping bottles at the club all the time. And listen, there's nothing wrong with it. But there is something wrong with it when it seemed more valuable than
contributing something
empathy
to
and exactly. I think that's when it started becoming a problem. So as now you want to be the guy who's always popping up bottles at the club, but you don't want to be the guy who's taking care of the people at home.
You want to be the guy who's going to help the youth in the community, uplift them. So that's why we hear cries of unemployment and whatnot, because people have no longer taken the road or the role of leadership. People no longer take the role of empowering others. It is always about me, 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 me. So there's a problem that we are seeing also with materialism, as you're saying. People want to have more so that they can show that they are better than any other people. Because there is the whole poverty mindset that is in our background. We've always desired to have certain assets that when the time comes for us to have those assets, we just only are focusing on materialism and consuming, because now we notice okay, well, I can be able to do this, I can be able to do that. And then we forget that role we have to play in our society. We forget that contribution that we need to make in the world. So yeah, it really is like that. Sometimes it's, materialism can blind us to our true purpose.
Any final thoughts?
Yeah, well, if I had to, I would really sell my soul so that we can find the world in peace. And whatever the situation is currently with the whole protests and the xenophobic attacks, I just wish, and I want to share this with the people, that let's just live through. Let's just find a way of being or living in the world with peace. we can coexist with each other, and there are plenty opportunities. Now that maybe foreigners are going to take all the opportunities, there's still plenty opportunities. We just need to have that mindset shift. Just need to have that mindset shift. And then also remembering Ubuntu, we are because of other people. So when you have the values of Ubuntu, you understand compassion, you understand respect and dignity, and you'll be able to give that to other people. And then also, our policymakers need to work hard as well to maintain the processes of doing things correctly. So yeah, those are just my last thoughts. We are all the same as humans, and one thing that we all need to strive for is peace. And when we're striving for peace, let's also remember the values of compassion, respect, and dignity. So those I feel very much important as we wrap it up.
A beautiful closing, man.
Yeah,
Cheers.
yeah, yeah. All right. Sobodo.